Hello everyone, welcome to this mini lecture on Father Anscar Chupungco's book, What Then is Liturgy? Musings and Memoir. So it's a work he wrote later in his life. He's since passed away a few years ago. He's a Filipino Benedictine monk, liturgical theologian, one of the well-known liturgical theologians of the 20th and the 21st century. And he offers many candid, helpful reflections in this book. And why I like to feature this book is because it brings in a lot of important conversation pieces around the issue of inculturation when it comes to liturgy, a lot of practical application points, a lot of points dealing with sacramentals, and just like global perspectives on liturgy. So the opening quote, he just starts with a real zinger on page 1. And it's from a letter of Pope St. Paul VI to the Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, who is associated with the Society of St. Pius X movement, I believe, but a kind of ultra-traditionalist movement that denied the legitimacy of the Second Vatican Council and things like that. And it's a very dangerous heretical position. And all the popes since this time have tried to build a bridge with this faction that broke away from unity with Roman Catholic Church. But here we see some very strong words from Pope Paul VI to Archbishop Lefebvre. And it's interesting how Chupungco begins his book here. What I like about it, again, it's very candid, and a lot of us know the various divisive faction kind of things that can go on in the church, globally and also locally in parish life. And there's sadly a lot of divisions surrounding different opinions about liturgy, but liturgy is that which is supposed to bring us all together as Catholics. So we have to have a very well educated and informed liturgical theology so we don't get carried away with all these political hermeneutics, these reductionistic ways of thinking about things, whether based on a preference for the old or the new. We need to embrace the whole that is Catholicism and really know what that means. So let's just look at this quote and proceed from there. Again, it's going to be a quote that's calling out a faulty perspective of a kind of the far right, you could say, of things. But at the same time, equal things could call out what goes on the far left of things. So we bear this in mind, we situate it according to the whole. So Paul VI writes, "For you, the former rite of Mass," meaning the Tridentine Mass, the pre-Vatican II liturgy, which Lefebvre and his followers say is the only legitimate form of the Mass. They did not go along with the Vatican II liturgical reform and what became now known as the ordinary form of the Mass, in particular the vernacular language of a place. So, for you, the former rite of Mass is a sign of your false ecclesiology and a matter in which to assail the Council, Second Vatican Council, and its work of reform. You take as pretext or as your alleged justification that only in the former rite are the authentic sacrifice of the Mass and the authentic ministerial priesthood preserved, their meaning unobscured. We reject out of hand this erroneous judgment and unjust accusation. We cannot permit the divine Eucharist, sacrament of unity, to be made the source of division. We cannot permit you to make use of it as an instrument and symbol of your rebellion. Whew. Strong words from the Pope to a fellow bishop. but necessary words. And Chupungco goes into why he is talking about this this issue, and then he mentions the Pope Benedict XVI's attempt at a via media in his, I think, Apostolic Constitution, Summorum Pontificum, to try to keep these kind of renegade heretical sects from carrying on. And even more recently, we had Pope Francis, his motu proprio, trying to pull the reins on the Tridentine Mass, you could say, movement in the global church, because the other bishops are recognizing too is becoming more and more a source of division. So we want to know are the Pope and bishops saying about these things. And whenever you have someone, whether clergy or laity, acting like they know better than the Pope, they know better than the Second Vatican Council, that should be indication that there's a problem with their thinking. Because as Catholics, we trust the magisterial authority of the Pope, the ecumenical councils, and there's no Catholicism without them. So this is an important point to start when it comes to things liturgical. On page 2, we have reference to the very important concept of inculturation. We read the Second Vatican Council document, Sacrosanctum Concilium, the Constitution on Sacred Liturgy, all about the need for liturgical adaptation, which is happening from the earliest times of the Church. And inculturation is when we have these things that are essential to the faith take on flesh in various cultures of the world. So the mode of expression can look a little different from liturgical rite to liturgical rite. For example, we have the Chaldean rite. That's not the same as the Maronite rite. That's not the same as the Byzantine rite. That's not the same as the Roman rite. And the Ethiopian rite, and so on. All these different rites, Zairian rite, throughout the church, hold together the Catholicism of the church, the unity of the plurality of forms of expression. The essential is the same across the board. It's the same Jesus, it's the same creed, it's the same sacramental mystery, but how it's expressed, the forms the prayers take, what happens within the liturgical space, what happens with the music. There's a lot of room for variation here, and that's okay, and that's a good thing. Plurality is necessary for unity. If we don't have plurality, it's just more of the same. It's just uniformity. And uniformity is not the same thing as unity. So St. Paul talks about the church as the mystical body of Christ, 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And he says it's one body yet made up of many parts. And the same thing is said about liturgical rites throughout the world, throughout the history of the church. And even the ordinary form of the Roman Rite lends itself, through the conciliar reform of Vatican II, to be adaptable in a variety of cultures around the world. And in the United States, for example, there's a variety of cultures present in our country. And so the principle of liturgical inculturation is very important. Chupungco on page 4 gives a lot of reference to the aggiornamento of Vatican II, the bringing up to date, and the strengthening of whatever can help to call the whole of humankind into the household of the church. What I really like about Chupungco, and the points he's getting at, have to do with the relationship between liturgy and evangelization. The evangelization of the people already in the fold of faith, already in the pews, but also those who are outside, and how to draw them in. This is a very important question for us involved in the church and in ministry. One of the key principles of the Constitution on Sacred Liturgy of Vatican II, we have on page 6 in the middle, Article 14. In the reform and promotion of the liturgy, full and active participation by all the people is the aim to be considered before all else. For it is the primary and indispensable source from which the faithful are to derive the true Christian spirit. So it's also called full, conscious, active participation. Is a norm, is a principle when we're thinking about things liturgical. If things that are done in the liturgy don't promote this, they're not in line with this reform. If things that are done in the liturgy make the congregation into mere spectators, that's not what's supposed to be happening. At the same time, things have to be tempered in liturgy carefully so that it doesn't become too busy. Full conscious active participation doesn't always mean noise, doesn't always mean movement, doesn't always mean something is happening. Sometimes it means we all are praying silently together, but we're all participating. It doesn't mean that the congregation says every word of every prayer and every word of every song and everything. But on the whole, the liturgy should invite the faithful to full conscious active participation in what's going on. Everything should be accessible within the liturgy for who's there. Page 9, we have, I think, a humorous quote. I wrote a little smiley face next to my marking of this quote. Chupungco, just quoting hypothetically, you hear people complaining about this present day and age because things were much better in former times. I wonder what would happen if they could be taken back to the days of their ancestors. Would we not still hear them complaining? You may think past ages were good, but it is only because you are not living in them. So this is so interesting. And this, in fact, is a quote from St. Augustine. So it's true. Sometimes we think there's some glory days of the past, we just have to get back to that and all will be well. But every era of Christianity had its challenges, had its struggles, and there's this ideal of some perfect scenario with some form of expression, as if that's what it looks like in heaven, or as if that's what it looked like at the Last Supper, or things like that. But the fact is, cultures evolve, they develop, they change, and so if we're looking for some pristine ideal, that in effect, in relation to a current culture, could be more like a museum artifact and not really engaging people in real time. So we have to watch out for that. Just a couple more points. Page 10. The meaning of this liturgical enculturation. Liturgical enculturation should try to satisfy the needs of traditional culture and at the same time take account of the needs of those affected by an urban or industrial culture. So this was an instruction on the liturgy by the Congregation of Divine Worship and a balanced approach to a situation, the old and the new. The key word there is and. The key word for Catholicism is and. Old and new, scripture and tradition, faith and reason, grace and works. And so many ands, male and female. All of this together. Page 15, the need for liturgical adaptation. For example, masses with children. Depending on who is gathering, a lot of times certain adaptations should be made, again, to make the mysteries of faith accessible to all who are present and not some esoteric exercise for some religious elite. he does talk about the role of women in the church, reflecting back on the role of women deacons in the early church, which had a very specified role, and that we recall around the year 1000 when adult baptism gave way to infant baptism. And so then there's a gradual disappearance of women deacons, whose principal role had been to anoint adult women catechumens during baptism, along with the rise of monasticism too. I know this for a fact, where you have female monastic orders, and the abbess, the religious superior of the female religious orders, also that kind of role took the place of women deacons too. So we don't always see that an abbess around as much anymore. And so it raises questions about women's leadership in the church. Where does this need to expand or become more official, instituted, perhaps you could say, given that something like over 80% of lay ecclesial ministers in parishes are women, and so on. So he has some interesting, again, candid reflections about this. And then a great section about enculturation, pages 19 through into 22. And this is what I see is golden material for us to think about the instruction on the Roman liturgy and enculturation. This document that he mentions here, and that he says he had always insisted that enculturation is a dynamic translation of the typical edition of the liturgical books. What it does is translate the Roman Rite into the language of the local church by integrating suitable cultural elements. A translation in which he means dynamic equivalence. So he says he would like to consider this a basis for the Holy See to declare enculturated forms of liturgy as other extraordinary forms of the Roman Mass, along with the Tridentine Rite. And that's a really interesting argument he's making there. So we have in the Roman Rite the ordinary form, which has room for adaptation, cultural adaptation in a lot of different ways. And then the extraordinary form, which is not as much room for adaptation, partly because it's not simple in itself. It's filled with lots of liturgical accoutrements, and so there's not much room to adapt, therefore. That's why the liturgical reform of Vatican II happened, so that it was to restore the classic Roman Rite, characterized by simplicity, brevity, gravity, sobriety, all these various things that allow the gospel to be accessible to more and more people around the world, in which no one feels like a stranger, in which they all belong to the Domus Ecclesiae, the church home. In that this is something where he's kind of critiquing, and he said there should not be any ethnic group that is hurt when told that a certain rite indigenous to one's country or of origin or type of musical rhythm is not liturgically appropriate or suitable. In that there shouldn't be this unjust cultural discrimination going on in the church, but we always have to find ways to affirm what is good in the diversity of cultures around the world, and let their various modes of expression find a home within liturgy, given all the proper liturgical rules and norms be respected. So he says the challenge concerns our readiness for liturgical pluralism rooted in cultural ethnic diversity. And so we know that until the 7th century, the liturgy of Rome was bilingual because of the migrants from Eastern Europe. Liturgy highly values hospitality. A very great line there. In the sight of God and the church, all races and ethnic groups are equal. Important point. It's absolutely true. All races and ethnic groups are equal in the sight of God and the teaching of the church. So these are some great points that I'd like to highlight in this first section of Anscar Chupungco's book, What Then is Liturgy?